My parents abandoned me for inheritance, the letter that changed everything. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. The courier asked for my ID like I might steal my own life, then handed me a stiff envelope with my grandmother's attorney's seal and a plastic card with an access code. I signed with a pen that wrote too smoothly and walked back through the community college quad, where I shelve boxes and teach freshmen how to read timestamps like truth. In the archive room, I locked the door and set the envelope on the metal table that shudders if you lean. My hands remembered bus schedules and cafeteria napkins used as notebooks. The envelope remembered a woman who wrote letters on paper that smelled faintly of lemon and ink. I slid it open carefully, the way you open a bandage when you're not sure whether the wound is ready to see air. Inside, one page in Grandma's slanted hand and a short typed note from the trust office. Her words were tidy and stubborn. If anyone told you that distance was necessary, no, I disagreed loudly. The typed note contained a link to a digital archive and a temporary code that expires in 24 hours. My work brain engaged first: deadlines, backups, logs. My son brain followed 2 steps behind, limping. I powered up the workstation we keep for fragile donors, the one with the quiet fan, and touched the card like it might be hot. I thought of Celeste saying, "We did what was stable," and Martin echoing her like a hallway does. Stability never asked my name at the bus station. I entered the code, and the portal loaded a table of PDFs with labels that belonged to a different household than the one I knew. Letter of wishes, childless clause, distribution memos, custodial account summary, emancipation order. The hum of the server sounded like a held breath. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Dinner Sunday? Keep it light." My grandmother's scrawl said, in blue ink, "You were never light to me." The cursor blinked, patient as a nurse. I opened the portal and saw my name marked administratively removed. When I was 12, Celeste called a trip a rotation, like I was a crop. I learned every couch in Aunt Ruth's house and the exact sigh of the bus that took me back to an apartment where my toothbrush moved compartments like a traveling salesman. Temporary, they said, the way rich people say winter. Martin was softer about it. "Let's give you space to grow," but his softness wore Celeste's edges. Some nights I fell asleep to motivational podcasts muffled through their door. Some mornings I woke to silence that felt like a whiteboard erased too hard. Grandma hated euphemisms. She kept postcards from my field trips in a box labeled evidence of joy. When Celeste told me we needed to align expectations, Grandma took me for pancakes and translated. "They're trimming you to fit a table they bought last week." At the bus depot, the PA chimed 3 notes like an apology. Celeste squeezed my shoulder and said, "Opportunity is a door you walk through alone." I carried a backpack with 2 shirts, math homework, and a framed photo of Grandma that rattled in the frame when I walked. Martin tucked cash into the side pocket like guilt fits best when it lies down. Years later, Celeste tells the story differently. "I was independent early. Adulthood suits me. We all did our best with limited information. It's a skill, turning a bruise into a lesson." At Sunday dinner last month, she retold the bus station as mentorship, her voice smooth like a keynote. "Noah found his stride because we believed in responsibility," she said. Martin refilled water. I watched the condensation slide down the pitcher and thought about how cold things pretend to be helpful while they change the temperature of the room. I smiled because smiling pays better than objections in families that love optics. I scraped my plate and counted to 10 like stopping a surge. She called abandonment opportunity, and the room agreed out of habit. The first red flag wasn't red, it was beige bureaucratic. I requested my old school file for a background check at the college and found a stamp. SELF supporting minor. There was a date 3 months before the bus depot goodbye and a note. Parent contact rerouted. Student manages own affairs. I stared at the word manages until it blurred into magnets. A week later, the alumni office from a scholarship committee called to confirm an address for a disbursement that never happened, a scholarship in my name that never crossed my palm. "We thought you chose a different path," the coordinator said brightly. I said I did. I didn't say the path was paved with couches and volunteer hours at a thrift store that smelled like lilies and dust. Martin still speaks like mercy is a credit card. "We carried what we could," he says, eyes gentle, voice washed. Celeste prefers frameworks. We created resilience, she says, as if resilience is a geometry proof. My mouth learned to say, I appreciate the intent, and my heart learned to sit on its hands. Then the courier showed up, and the letter rearranged the furniture in my skull. I read the letter 3 times, once like an archivist, twice like a grandson. The link opened a scan of Grandma's letter of wishes, non-binding guidance, but guidance anyway, naming me as the intended beneficiary of an education and endowment stream my parents had temporarily consolidated for administrative efficiency. There were trustee memos with phrases that sounded like foghorn blasts. Dependent status unclear, childless clause potentially applicable, beneficiary reconsideration pending administrative review. I wrote the phrases on a notepad because words that get paid to be vague behave better when they're written by a pencil. The letter waited like a fuse, and my doubt became oxygen. Sunday dinner was roast chicken and a centerpiece of eucalyptus cut to look casual. Celeste loves a curated mess. We all did our best, she said between bites, eyes soft, posture like a magazine. Your independence made everything possible. Martin nodded and passed me salt the way you pass a verdict to a man already resigned to it. I opened my mouth to say something useful, and my phone vibrated with a single ping. The archive had unlocked additional documents. My lap felt suddenly public. I excused myself and stood by the sink where we once washed raspberries under too cold water to make them sting deliciously. The new files showed a summary of a childless clause, a clause that increased a beneficiary's share if they had no legal dependents. There were internal emails time-stamped around the same week as my emancipation order. The subject lines were unromantic, distribution impact, optics, documentation sufficient. A note from Ms. Rios flagged uncertainty about my status. School files list him as self-supporting. Need to confirm custodial accounts. Another email carried an attachment, donor-advised subfund, proposed redirect. My chest buzzed like I had swallowed the phone. Back at the table, Celeste smiled at me like a photographer asked for warmth. You know you can always ask us anything, she said. I just did, I replied, and let the sentence hang like a coat no one wanted to claim. She dabbed her mouth with a napkin and said, We all remember events differently. Memory is political. Martin cleared his throat, which is his way of changing topics without receiving credit for it. I set my fork down and folded my hands as if prayer could find a job here. Pain became proof when the archive bloomed open on my phone. After dinner, texts turned into ellipses. Celeste sent a paragraph about context. Martin asked me not to open old wounds. Aunt Ruth called from her kitchen, where the clock ticks like a metronome for courage. I kept some letters, she said. I was a coward then. I'm braver now. We spoke in slow sentences because speed insults truth. I listed what was on the line. The education stream my grandmother wanted for me. A small donor-advised subfund that could underwrite the rest of my schooling. My name in the official story. Aunt Ruth told me to write like I get paid by accuracy. I inventoried my life on a legal pad. Rent, bus pass, the archive job, a secondhand bike with a squeak that announces me half a block away. I wrote, in a separate column, the cost of keeping peace, calling it complicated, letting family friends repeat the independent success myth, watching a fund with my name on it water someone else's garden. I tried on the cost like a jacket and couldn't move my arms. At the bank safe deposit, I found a folder labeled with Grandma's neat caps, Noah, school. It held report cards, photos, a brochure of a college I toured and couldn't afford, and a copy of a letter she'd sent the trust officer the year before she died. It used the word intend 4 times in 2 paragraphs. Intent is not law, but it is clarity. I photocopied everything and wrote the dates on my arm until the ink bled into my sleeve. Back home, I placed the copies on my kitchen table and arranged them like a timeline altar. Light from the street cut the papers into rectangles of doubt and certainty. I brewed tea and drank it cold because I forgot it was there. I printed the emancipation order and held it until my hand shook. Somewhere, a teenager I used to be stared at me from behind the glass of time. Dates would decide, not apologies rehearsed to protect expensive silence. I started with county records because paper has a smell that lies can't copy. The emancipation filing was neat enough to frame, notarized, stamped, scheduled. The date sat 3 days before an internal memo about a distribution adjustment. The notary's book number matched, but the line underneath referenced a document type I didn't recognize, beneficiary status affidavit. I copied the citation and tucked it under a paperclip like a small animal you intend to release later. At the alumni office, I asked about the scholarship in my name that never arrived. The coordinator pulled up a screen and frowned in the polite way. Eyebrows gently nodded, mouth practicing on saying. The check was voided, she said. We received notice that the student pursued alternative funding. I laughed once, and it sounded like boxing up a room. From where? I asked. She scrolled and read, Family Foundation. I thanked her and left before my throat did something performative. Aunt Ruth texted a photo of an envelope flap with Grandma's handwriting across the seal. For Noah, when he has questions. It had sat in Ruth's desk for a decade. Inside, a copy of a custodial account statement. Deposits regular until the year of the bus depot, then nothing. A sticky note in Grandma's blue ink. Ask for procedures, not favors. I wrote it on my palm like a spell. At the notary shop near the courthouse, the clerk let me flip the log under supervision. The pen indented the names like a soft hammer. I found Celeste's signature, practiced and crisp. I found Martin's, shy. The clerk pointed to the witness column. It held a neighbor's name I recognized from HOA newsletters that used the word harmony like a leash. My head buzzed. I thanked the clerk and walked outside into light that made everything look honest for 2 seconds. The notary stamp ticked louder than my heart in that copy. MS. Rios answered my email with sentences that walked in straight lines. We scheduled a preliminary information call, and she began with definitions so no one could hide behind jargon. Letter of wishes, non-binding guidance attached to a trust, administrative removal, an internal tag for distributions paused or redirected, childless clause, allocation shift when a beneficiary has no legal dependents. She never said my parents' names. She said requesting parties and documented actions. It felt sterile until she asked, Would you like your aunt present as a witness? I said yes and muted myself to breathe. Aunt Ruth sat at her kitchen table with the ticking clock behind her, holding a folder like a flotation device. I shared my screen and put the letter of wishes beside the executed amendments the way a librarian shelves 2 editions that should match and don't. The differences were small but fatal. A footnote moved from asterisks to numerals. A distribution paragraph that once referenced my grandson Noah now said, remaining education beneficiaries. The change dated 2 weeks after the emancipation filing. Process can be weaponized without breaking rules, Ms. Rios said evenly. Our job is to see whether procedures were followed and whether guidance was ignored. I listed the timestamps like beads, reading them aloud until the numbers felt like a heartbeat. Ruth unfolded a photocopy from Grandma's letters. Ask for procedures, not favors. Ms. Rios underlined the phrase on her pad where I couldn't see, but I heard the pencil move. After the call, Ruth slid an envelope across her table toward the webcam. Forgetting the internet doesn't move paper. We laughed, a short, cracked sound that felt like a door opening an inch. In the archive room, I built a side-by-side timeline. Emancipation order, alumni voided check, donor advised redirect, memo about optics, internal tag, administratively removed. I added the notary book line and the HOA witness name. My desk looked like a trial where the judge is a calendar. The timestamps contradicted our family myth in 12 quiet, undeniable minutes. I stopped looking for smoking guns and started measuring pipelines. The donor-advised subfund ledger, which I obtained through a public annual filing, listed expenses that sounded wholesome if you never asked who benefited. Community gala sponsorship, consulting, foundation administration, and education outreach, a phrase that can mean scholarships or brochures about scholarships. Cross-referencing the dates with my scholarship void showed a choreography I recognized from collections work. Money left one pocket wearing a halo and arrived in another pocket wearing a scarf. None of it was strictly illegal. All of it was careful. When I laid the emancipation order beside the clause summary, the geometry clicked. The no dependence clause didn't punish me. It erased my existence as leverage to increase a different share. Ruth found an email she never answered from a decade ago. Celeste asking her to confirm Noah's self-supporting status for a file. The subject line was a masterpiece of plausible care. College counseling, quick favor. My lungs performed the theatrical trick of forgetting how to work. I put the printed email on the table and weighted it with a stapler so the air couldn't lift it. I wrote out a one-breath explanation for the video narration later. Emancipation, court order making a minor legally independent, childless clause, shifts trust shares when a beneficiary has no dependents, donor-advised fund, a charitable account where donors recommend grants, not a piggy bank. Saying the words stole their power. I pictured Ms. Rios with her pencil, drawing straight lines through fog. The letter of wishes didn't beg, it instructed. Education changes a life, Grandma wrote in her slant. If Noah asks, help him learn without debt. She named me plainly. No asterisks, no numerals. My parents hadn't forged anything. They had instructed the system to look away at the right angle, while the paperwork took a different route. Good administration can be anesthesia. They didn't forge paper. They moved me with paperwork no one questioned. I packed a dossier like a field kit. Scans of clerk stamps, the notary line with witness names, email headers with full routing, alumni notes about the voided check, donor-advised filings with circled line items, the emancipation order, and a printed glossary. Each section began with a verb that didn't accuse, recorded, filed, redirected, voided, tagged. I rehearsed one sentence until it sat in my bones. I'm requesting a procedural review and correction consistent with the settler's guidance. Ruth offered to drive me, then laughed at herself and said, habit. I still think you're 12 when I'm afraid. I told her fear makes good mirrors. Ms. Rios confirmed a formal meeting for Thursday at 10 in a conference room named after a tree. I reserved a day off from the archive and left my supervisor a note with more context than he needed. He slid a peppermint across the desk and said, take 2. Bureaucracy eats sugar. I put the candy in my pocket like a tiny anchor. The night before, Celeste texted a photo of a sunset with the caption, perspective. Martin added, we love you. I stared at the pixels and tried to decide whether love without accountability is just weather. Then I ironed a shirt nobody would notice and labeled tabs in a binder until the labels looked like a skyline. I slipped Grandma's photo into the inside pocket. In it, she's holding a paper map and laughing as if directions are a game for the brave. At midnight, I laid the emancipation order on the table and traced the date. Numbers are small and stubborn. They don't negotiate. I practiced saying letter of wishes without apologizing for its non-binding nature. Guidance is still a voice. By 2 a.m. The kettle had boiled twice and forgotten me twice. I set 3 alarms and slept like a man guarding a suitcase in a bus station, half dreaming of chimes and announcements and a door that opens onto daylight. I booked the room and packed receipts like oxygen for daylight. They felt the pressure change before the storm reached shore. At 9 p.m., Celeste called with voicemail sweetness. We can resolve this privately, she said. No need to involve strangers who don't understand family. She proposed a settlement, a modest payment, and a statement we could craft together about different recollections. The word recollections wore a silk scarf. We'll make it right, she promised, in spirit. Martin texted, healing beats hearings. My chest tightened like a fist learning origami. I wanted their version of peace because it is sold as rest. But rest purchased with erasure is a lease that ends in winter. Ruth texted 3 words. Dates don't hate you. Then she added a photo of the envelope flap Grandma addressed in blue ink. For Noah, when he has questions. Some doors open only when you knock with both hands. I dialed Ms. Rios and left a voicemail confirming I would attend with a witness. Then I sat at the kitchen table and made a list of what private settlement would cost. The video I would never make. The students I'd tell to keep copies while I didn't. The next kid in a bus station whose file would say self-supporting, like a trophy and not a bruise. I put the peppermint in my mouth and let sugar argue with panic. The window reflected a version of me that looked taller than the man I remembered from the depot. At midnight, I walked to the bus terminal and sat on a bench that had learned my shape. The PA chimed its 3 notes, and a voice announced a route change like destiny could shift with a new platform. I stood, touched the column where a teenager once leaned, and promised him we were going to keep the paperwork honest this time. On the way home, the streetlights made every crosswalk a small stage where I remembered my lines. I almost said yes until Aunt Ruth's text broke the trance. The trust office conference room smelled like copy paper and citrus cleaner, and the art on the wall was a forest path that never ended. Ms. Rios greeted us with neutral warmth and set a digital recorder on the table. For accuracy, she said. Celeste arrived in slate silk. Martin in a jacket he wore to graduations he didn't attend. Ruth sat beside me and set her folded hands on the table like parentheses that kept me from spilling. I started with definitions. Letter of wishes, guidance from the settler explaining intent, I said. Emancipation, court order declaring a minor legally independent. Here, used to satisfy a no dependence clause. Ms. Rios nodded and asked me to proceed chronologically. I placed the emancipation order beside the clause summary, then the alumni voided check beside the donor-advised redirect, then the internal tag noting my administrative removal. I didn't look at my parents. I read dates and amounts the way people read vows, line by line, without embroidery. Celeste tried to interrupt with a story about sacrifice. Ms. Rios held up a hand. We're discussing procedure, she said. We will address narratives after the record is complete. Martin sighed like furniture settling. I continued. The notary book line, the HOA neighbor's witness signature, the internal memo about optics, within 48 hours of the emancipation stamp. Ruth passed me Grandma's photocopied note. Ask for procedures, not favors. I placed it on the table, a paper lighthouse. Finally, I slid the letter of wishes across. It named me. It used the word intent like a drum. Ms. Rios drew a box around my name with her pencil. We will verify execution against guidance, she said. If we find discrepancies, we will recommend remedial allocation and an independent audit. Celeste smiled the way people do when they think charm can edit minutes. Ms. Rios clicked the recorder off and then on again, a small mercy she didn't explain. Ms. Rios lifted a finger and the audit clock began. We returned a week later to a room that felt narrower, as if the walls had learned something heavy. Ms. Rios stacked copies in front of each of us and spoke like weather radio. Internal notes acknowledge the clause impact and your administrative removal, she said to me. The donor-advised distributions did not violate statute, but disregarded attached guidance that named you. She looked at my parents with the same expression she'd used on paper. Remedial allocation is appropriate. An independent audit will examine whether any party exercised undue influence over procedural choices. Celeste attempted a pivot to philanthropy. The foundation has done good, she said, listing galas like saints. Ms. Rios nodded without writing. Procedures are agnostic to sparkle, she said. Martin flinched. We wanted stability, he murmured, not to the room, but to a window that reflected no one. I said, you could have had stability in me. My voice surprised me by staying calm. Ruth touched my sleeve exactly once. On the summary sheet, a phrase I didn't know I needed waited like fresh air, beneficiary path correction, effective immediately. Another line assigned a case number to the audit and a date for the first distribution to my revived education endowment. I imagined textbooks like ladders. Celeste's mouth formed a perfect oval of wounded dignity. Then she closed it, the performance ending when the audience left. Ms. Rios concluded. Our office will also issue a letter clarifying that self-supporting status was used administratively and did not reflect abandonment by choice. The room made a soft sound, paper against paper, like relief shaking hands with grief. I tucked Grandma's photo back into my pocket and felt the map beneath her fingertips. Under fluorescent truth, their story finally stopped fitting inside its frame. Fallout doesn't explode, it settles. The trust posted a notice about remedial allocation and language so careful a microscope blushed. An independent firm began the audit. My phone became a junction box for logistics, beneficiary forms, W-9s, a schedule for transparent reporting. Celeste wrote a post about misunderstandings weaponized by outsiders, then deleted it when comments asked for dates. Martin sent a text that said only, I sleep poorly. I typed and erased a dozen replies before settling on, me too. At work, I took unpaid hours to attend meetings and crashed hard on the couch afterward with shoes still on. The archive room felt kinder than people. Boxes never pretend. A student asked why provenance matters, and I answered too long. Ruth brought soup in a jar, and a joke, so old it felt new. Neighbors performed sympathy like community theater, but a few left lemons on my stoop and no note, which is the kind of kindness that hides from thanks. The ledger changed shape. A temporary hold froze family foundation discretionary spends. The donor-advised subfund sprouted a new line with my name and a code. Ms. Rios sent a memo scheduling quarterly reviews, each with a public-facing summary. Sunlight, she wrote, is prophylactic. I printed the email and taped it inside a kitchen cabinet like a charm. Grief arrived on a delay. It wore Grandma's perfume and the sound of the bus depot chime. Some days I loved nobody. Other days I loved everybody. Both were exhausting. I reread the letter of wishes and understood that non-binding doesn't mean optional. It means you must build the binding yourself with boring, daily knots. Winning paperwork hurts differently. It aches where belief once slept. We signed a written agreement in a smaller room with worse art. It clarified my beneficiary path, revived the education endowment in my name, and established a reporting cadence. Quarterly summaries, annual third-party review, and a standing right to inspect procedures. Definitions sat on the first page so no clever mouth could move them later. Ms. Rios asked if I wanted language about apologies. I said no, I wanted language about passwords and access. Ruth and I made a ritual of Saturday scanning. We digitized Grandma's letters and labeled them with redundant files names because redundancy is love in archive form. I built a simple guide for my future self. How to request records, how to compare timestamps, how to read footnotes without flinching. I added one page called What to Do If You Feel Crazy. Sit down, drink water, open a calendar, list verbs. Celeste and I exchanged 2 emails about logistics. They were civil like treaties between neighbors who share a fence and not a history. Martin sent an article about adult children forgiving their parents, and then, 2 hours later, another about parents forgiving adult children. I answered neither. Forgiveness might arrive, access had to. At the bus depot, I stood under the speaker and waited for the 3-note chime. When it came, I didn't cry. I bought a coffee and watched a boy teach his little sister to read a schedule. He pointed, she nodded, the world worked. At home, I opened the cabinet, reread Sunlight is prophylactic, and practiced explaining spendthrift clauses in one breath so older viewers wouldn't have to pause the video. Then I added a slide to my class. Procedures outlive people, make them humane. For once, the ledger in my life finally pointed the same direction. I will not romanticize systems. They are tools, not hearts. But a tool used in daylight can lift weight a single person can't. I filmed my hands labeling scans and recorded a short explainer with the mic I borrow from the media lab. Ask for procedures, not favors. Keep copies. Read dates aloud. The footage shows only paper and my palms, but it carries Grandma's stubborn laugh. In the background, the archive room hums like a civilized engine. Ruth and I visited the thrift store where Grandma used to volunteer. The clerk rang up a lamp shaped like a lighthouse and said the discount applied because it had a scratch no one would notice at home. I placed the lamp on my desk beside the binder and plugged it in. The room warmed by a what you can measure and a memory you can't. I sent Ms. Rios a thank you note that was 3 sentences and full of nouns. She replied with a line I printed and taped to the cabinet. Administration should protect intent, not replace it. At night, when the building settles, metal pops in the vents like distant fireworks. I make tea and read one letter, then carry it back to its sleeve. The bus depot appears sometimes when I close my eyes, but the scene has changed. The boy is older, standing up, waving at me from a platform that leads forward instead of away. I don't wave back. I lift the camera and focus, steady as a ledger. Documents don't love you. People do, but documents can keep love from being misfiled. Tomorrow I teach freshmen how to anchor their names to their own lives. I will tell them about footnotes that try to walk, clauses that pretend to be weather, and envelopes that wait years for courage to arrive. After class, I'll stop by Ruth's and scan whatever is left to scan, knowing some things don't go in folders and still survive anyway. Tomorrow, I'll digitize the last box labeled, for Noah, when brave.